Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on state electricity markets. The topic of this webinar is state electricity markets, unlocking investment opportunities in a changing landscape. I'm going to start by introducing Nextier, and then I'll talk briefly about the topic and then introduce the panelists all in 5 minutes. After that, we'll take questions. I'll ask the panelists questions, and then the last 10 minutes will be spent answering questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box or in the chat. So Nextier is a multidisciplinary firm, and we deliver value through our expertise in policy research, program design, business strategy, and impact assessment. We're focused on sectors like energy, health, public policy, and security. Our aim is to tackle complex development challenges in Africa with innovative research-driven solutions. And we partner with governments, private firms, development agencies, to craft strategies that foster inclusive and sustainable growth to address Africa's unique problems. We have done a lot of work on state electricity markets. So far, we worked with 3 states and also development agencies like UKNIAF, states like Enugu, Anambra, and Katsina to design state electricity market policy bills and even to establish the State Electricity Regulatory Commission in Enugu. Today's topic is focused on state electricity markets, like I said before, and we think this is an important topic because this development represents one of the most transformative outcomes from Nigeria's Electricity Act of 2023, and we believe that this could unlock a new era of energy autonomy for Nigerian states. The Act grants Nigerian states the authority to create sub-regional electricity markets, empowering them to enact policies, regulations, and issue licenses to companies supplying power within their borders. And we believe that this bold shift can attract significant investments, expand energy access, and elevate Nigeria's current electricity access rate, which is estimated at about 60.5% by the World Bank in 2022. And this could also drive economic growth for 1 in 3 Nigerians, or actually 2 in 3 Nigerians who are classified as multidimensionally poor. But the issue is, or not an issue, but what we're aiming to solve here is that while the Act outlines the what, it doesn't state the how. So how are states actually going to achieve these goals and these lofty aims? So that's why we have this panel today, and we have experts on the panel who are going to discuss how we can build investor attractive markets. I'm going to talk about the panelists now and just give short bios to not take too much time. So first we have Frank Edozie, who is an engineer with experience in the energy industry spanning the petroleum and power sectors. He's currently the team lead at the United Kingdom Nigeria Infrastructure Advisory Facility, also known as UKNIAF. And then we have Chijioke Okonkwo, who is a seasoned energy professional with over 20 years of experience in the energy sector. He currently chairs the Enugu State Electricity Regulatory Commission, where he leverages his expertise to guide regulatory efforts and promote a sustainable electricity ecosystem in Enugu State. And last but not least, we have Nkem Ani, who is an accomplished executive leader with a strong dedication to advancing renewable energy. She brings a wealth of expertise in energy law and policy, corporate governance, and has extensive experience in the legal advisory and compliance sector within the power sector. We're now going to move on to questions, but like I said before, if you have questions for the panelists, please drop them in the Q&A box and we'll spend the last 10 minutes going through them, or you can also drop them in the chat box. So I'm going to just dive right in, directing my first question to Frank. Frank, I'd like to get your assessment of the speed and effectiveness of the developments we've seen with state electricity markets so far, with all that UKNIAF is doing in the sector. What have you learned and what are you seeing from engagements with governments at state and federal levels?
I would say it's a little over a year and a half or about of the Electricity Act coming into being, and I believe it was June last year. And to date, I think we have 7 states that have received from NERC the independence to take the regulation of the electricity market in their states in their own hands. And then a few others that are at various stages coming along. So I would say I'm largely satisfied with the pace when we see that 7 states are well on the way. But I must say that for me, it is actually less of speed than it is of effectiveness. What we need is to see successes in terms of the quality of service, electricity service that is delivered to consumers, that is coming from these efforts. And that is where, efforts like we see from Enugu State, speak to me, because I do see concrete measures being taken to make these changes and look at introducing electricity from within the states to augment what is coming from the national grid. But we must also say that when success is important, it's good that states take a critical look of themselves from inwards. So there's a lot to say for an approach that takes into account the specificities of the state. Right? What are the energy sources they have in place? What is the demography of the demand? What is it that the state wants to do with additional power? And how does the state want to approach that? And you craft all of this from policy into law, and then spend time building the institutions that are required to drive this. For me, there are two critical success factors. One is the one I've talked about. The other one is the ability of the state to attract investments in the electricity sector within the state. And I say this looking at what I believe to be the critical failure factors of the national electricity market, the absence of investments in the space, whether it's generation, transmission, or distribution. If the states must succeed, they must look at being able to attract investments into these sectors. Now, thankfully, there's more than a few that recognize this, and that's why in the organization that I work for, UKNIF, late last year and early this year, we spent time on putting a framework together to help states think through their approach to transit from the national market to sub-national market. So put together a toolkit, working together with the Nigerian Governors Forum to make sure that this reaches far and wide, across the country. So it does give some kind of guide, how to guide for states in terms of going through. So in summary, a good progress is being made in terms of the motion, but what we now need is to begin to see the impact on supply of electricity to consumers across the country.
Thank you, Frank. Well said. I think one of the states that's been making huge strides has been Enugu, being the first to actually establish the Regulatory Commission, the State Regulatory Commission. So, Chijioke, can you tell us a bit more about how Enugu has been able to move so fast? I know that Frank mentioned that it's not about speed, but more about impact. But even at that, you seem to be moving faster than most states. So, how have you been able to move so fast? And what's been a significant challenge that you've encountered, and how have you addressed that?
Thank you so much, Noelle. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I must say thank you to the NIAF group for putting this together. It gives us an opportunity to clear some of the issues that has probably even frustrated others from taking the same initiative. And with respect to the question you just asked, I must say that Enugu State has been able to make a lot of progress because of our understanding of what the law, the Electricity Act of 2023 has presented as an opportunity, in the power sector. Let me clear a wrong narrative or perception that is out there, especially with states that are still considering taking this same leap. And that is the fact that with respect to passing your own electricity law and setting up your own state electricity market, The narrative that has been pushed out there seems to be that states would now be isolated from participating in the wholesale electricity market arrangement, which is to be able to offtake power from the national grid, that you can only probably even play within your own space, have generators, potential IPP developers set up their own power plants for your use, and remove from being able to execute power purchase agreements with grid-connected generating stations or generating power plants. And that is actually untrue. That is not the case. We will continue to participate in the wholesale electricity market. Instead, I see what the Act has presented as an opportunity to states, to complement that grid arrangement, where states can develop or play along the entire value chain. Developers or private sector investors can play along the entire value chain of the power sector, from generation, transmission, distribution, and possibly retailing, where the state market can actually be developed to provide electricity that is accountable, reliable, and sustainable to the citizens of that state, using the resources that are within that state, and still play by signing PPAs with generating power stations that are connected from the grid. I mean, the law is clear, or the Act is clear on where there is that very firm and friendly handshake between the wholesale electricity market and the subnational electricity market that is being developed within the states. Now, we totally understand this arrangement and saw it as an opportunity that we cannot wait to take advantage of. Instead, we jumped right in. I must say that our policy that is guiding Enugu State's electricity market is very clear, and the law is also very clear. In fact, it has guided us in putting together the regulations that has been we are currently implementing within the state to guide operators or players in our own space. And I have to give this benefits to, or accolades to, His Excellency the Executive Governor of Enugu State, who has decided to take this as one of his core mandates to resolve the electricity challenges in Enugu State for the benefit of the citizens, and has put in place the Enugu State Electricity Policy. That is our guiding document that gives us a plan as to how we can develop our own state electricity market over the next 5-10 years, while also opening it up for private sector investment, providing that clarity that we are running on a willing buyer, willing seller arrangement, where the sanctity of contracts and obligations or provisions in power purchase agreements will be honored, and that people are amenable to paying its bills or paying their bills in full, where subsidy does not have to be the condition for state to participate in the sector, but that we have created an enabling environment to support private sector driven projects in the power sector to one that is actually the business that we have all envisaged it to be from day one. I mean, we have privatized, starting from the national level with the 2005 electricity law to date, to the new 2023 Electricity Act. It spoke to letting the power sector be driven by the private sector, with government now playing that supportive role. But one thing we are certain about is that in creating a market, it's not one that has to be, how do I put it now, driven by just one entity. No, the market has quite a number of players participating in different areas in the power sector and competing for customers, so as to be driven by efficiency, affordability, as the case may be, and providing that service that satisfies that paying customer at the end of the day. And I think that is where the state has actually set its own standards by creating that signage across the different arms of state administration, to align itself to the law that has been passed graciously by the State House of Assembly. How do I put it now? Putting in place a team of professionals, that are currently leading on developing the market within the Electricity Commission, Electricity Regulatory Commission, setting up an arm of the state as well that will support private sector investments, provide them with any form of incentive or subsidy that they can leverage on, and most importantly, speak to the people, to align itself with what the state is proposing to guarantee that uninterrupted power supply across the nooks and crannies of the state. Please, to the last question that you asked, which is what is the major challenge that we have faced, in driving this process? And one is that perception that everybody has that EEDC has left the state. We needed to go out and provide that clarity that while EEDC is no longer operating within Enugu State, its subsidiary, which it has set up, would assume control of its assets, liabilities, operations, and personnel to continue its operations. However, we do not see it as old wine in new skin, no, because we know that a lot of orientation, change management processes, education, enlightenment is going into the organization so that they can actually be a lot more professional in delivering electricity services to the citizens of Enugu State. So yes, there has been a lot of improvement, and yes, we know that there's still a lot more to do. And yes, we have put in place structures, regulations, both within the commission and outside of the commission, within the state apparatus, to attract the right kind of investment, so that what we are actually saying is people should come into Enugu and set up their business and see for themselves what opportunities lie within the state, because it's huge.
Thank you, Chijioke. I think we'll come back to you on what you said about incentives and the state setting up incentives for private investments, especially because that's like our main topic for the day. But Nkem, as a policy expert, I know that policy is very important, but policies alone don't deliver electricity to homes. So what do you think is still missing in the Act and all the policies that have been a result of the Act?
Thank you, Noelle, for inviting me to this panel. Yes, you're right. Policies, regulations, or even the institutions alone will not be able to deliver electricity to the people. What they do is to provide the framework so that the market can be managed. What I think is missing in this whole thing is that states should provide practical solutions to the major problems plaguing the sector. And the major problems are lack of or inadequate infrastructure, as well as lack of access to funding. So what should the government do? Developing a state electricity market is very, very capital intensive. It's very expensive. Like last week, we were negotiating with a private investor that wants to come into one of the states to bring in about 20 megawatts of power plant of some sort, and it's costing about $54 million. Where would the state government bring these things from? So what the state government should do is to create an enabling environment for the people that have the money to come in and invest. And nobody will bring their money if they feel they won't recoup the ROI on the investment won't be there. So the state should be very intentional in creating an enabling environment to invite these investors. For instance, the electricity policy which Nextier developed for Enugu State, it clearly states that the state would not hold or be a market player. Rather, the state would enable electricity projects to thrive in the state. So this shows a state that is serious and a state that is willing to open up its market for private investors to thrive in. So what the state should do, I want to talk about the particular actions the state would take to ensure that investment is, or that the state has an investment-friendly environment. It can include providing or facilitating access to land. In a case where the investor needs land, the state should make it easier for the investor to have access to land. In addition, the state can make licensing, the procedure for licensing, a bit simpler and easy instead of bureaucratic. Another thing the state can do is even tax credits. The state can make procurement processes much easier, the things that can boost investor confidence and make them bring in their resources, invest, and be sure that those investments are protected. But in this case, I want to balance my views. Where in a situation where the state government wants to not, for the lack of a better word, please investors and attract them into the state, they should also consider the purchasing power or the capacity of the people that will pay for these products. So the state, in some cases, the state may provide subsidies, but most of the states we have worked with will tell you they don't have money, they won't provide subsidies. So in such a case, the state will have to look for avenues to make the cost of business very low so that the people will be able to purchase these services. So my point is there will always have to be a balance between the state trying to make the environment friendly for investors and trying to make boost the investors' confidence. There has to be a balance between that and the purchasing power of the people. The people should also be able to afford the power. Back to you, Noelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkem. I think, like you said, $54 million for 20 megawatts is quite insane. But I think that also in Nigeria, we know that the reason why some of these investments are so expensive, or the cost of doing business so expensive, is because of, like you said, there's no enabling environment, and developers have to add in these costs when they are coming into the country or coming into the states. So back to Chijioke, because I know you mentioned incentives that Enugu was setting up. So can you tell us a bit about these incentives, and if you can be specific, because I know things are still developing, but telling us about incentives that you think other states can make available, I think that would be really good to hear at this point.
Okay, thank you very much for that question, Noelle. So let me summarize some of the structures that structures that we have actually put in place to support private sector driven investments in the power sector in Enugu. Apart from the regulations that we have actually carried out consultations with potential investors as to whether it fits their investment strategy, and took into consideration what they would like to see, before finalizing on our regulations to guide their investments, which they have adopted and we're currently implementing in the state. I mean, our law has also detailed some potential incentives that developers and service providers or players in the power sector can take advantage of. One of them is the provision of what the Enugu State Electrification Agency has been set up to do, and that is to manage the Enugu State Electrification Funds. The funds is a fund that is available to any private sector developer to access, as part of the state's, how do I put it now, equity or investment in his or her project, and that is almost like the state supporting the private sector investment by having a skin in the game, being in a position to put its money where its mouth is. Now, our law also specifies that the Enugu State Electrification Agency would take care of acquiring land, compensating the owners of that land for as right of way to connect any private sector endeavor or project to the state distribution network, or to expand the distribution network as the case may be, or connect to the last mile, citizens in the state. So that particular headache of acquiring land for right of way and connecting or expanding electricity projects across the state has been taken upon by the state itself to do for private sector developers. It will implement the project, but it will acquire the land and right of way for projects to have that smooth flow of not being frustrated or constrained by communal issues or landowners, as the case may be. The state is also in a position to provide land to any private sector developer that wants to build a power project. Let me put it this way, and I'm coming from the perspective of what Nkem said. Any serious developer that wants to come and play in our space, would want to be sure that their investment is protected. So if you're putting down probably what we probably envisage a megawatt would cost, which is an average of about $1 million, that is a huge investment. And we don't expect that you're bringing in your funds to do business in our state without offering you some sort of support that would help. So if the project is socially oriented, targeted to the citizens of the state. Since the state has already committed to improving access to off-takers or consumers within the state can say, okay, fine, I can give you land for this project free of charge. And you do not have to now accommodate that cost in your project. That drives down the cost of setting up your project in the first place. It impacts positively on your capex. Now, also taking full responsibility to acquire the land for the right of way for your project is an additional incentive. And finally, in also, how do I put it now? Putting its money or supporting your project with some level of funding that can go into the project itself is also some sort of incentive. Now, it depends on who is coming on board and what the project is targeted at. You can also negotiate to have that tax holiday. It is up to you. That is a decision that the state itself has to take, and it may be driven by who's developing the project and who's the target off-taker for the project, as long as it's to the citizens of the state. And because we're not putting any subsidy in place to resolve issues associated with consumption, to reduce the tariff, as the case may be, we are very much amenable to providing incentives, support, and being a part of a project as a state, to ensure that the capex itself is one that is affordable, that leads to a tariff that is affordable at the end of the day. Now, I must say that while this is coming from the state, this is what the state has put in place as structures. We are also in collaboration with two private sector driven institutions that would provide some level of incentive, well, I won't call it incentive, securitization, to any private sector driven investment. And I think I can probably mention them right here that we are working with the infra credits who would consider projects to see that rather than rather than projects being implemented with a very short recovery period associated with commercial loans, that they can extend the recovery period of such loans that's debt components of any private sector driven project to a period that is a lot more acceptable, be it probably from 7-8 years to 15 years. Now, if you're recovering your debt payback period for debt components of your investment over a 15-year period, it gives that comfort that you're not charging a very high tariff. It's practically almost cuts it into two by half, and makes the tariff a lot more affordable. We're also working with the infrastructure bank to syndicate loans or the debt component for power projects in the state. So any private sector developer that wants to come and play in our space is amenable to, once we see that the project is one that is viable and meets the commercial requirements that we would like to see take off in the state, we can refer them to these two institutions. In fact, they can actually take the initiative from this conversation to have a chat with either the infrastructure bank or the infra credit that they would like to set up their project in Enugu. And this is who their target off-taker is. And this is what they are trying to put in place to ensure that they run a commercially viable business. Because we expect that anybody that's coming into play is coming in to do business. We are not coming to sign a contract that the state will partner with you to do some power projects and expect that the state will provide some level of security itself for consumption in a power purchase agreement between two private sector entities, that is, be it consumers and a service provider. No, we are not pushing that narrative. Instead, these two private sector individuals would look at projects, support it in every way possible to see that it can run its commercial course. As a regulatory commission, we're giving you a 20-year license. A 20-year license, once we have found that your project is viable, which gives you all the time to recover your investment and more. So having a power purchase agreement that you would expect that you would have recovered that investment in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years is actually keeping it too short and would blow the tariff out of proportion. But with these structures and possibilities that developers can take advantage of, we see their tariff that will be approved at the end of the day being affordable don't forget that part of the incentive is that we are leaving you to negotiate what your tariff should be. But we'll look at it to be sure that it is not blown out of proportion, because any private sector driven initiative is driven by profit. The higher the profit, the more they'll smile to the bank. But if we are sure that your costs are adequate, are accurate, by all means, it's a willing buyer, willing seller arrangement. That is what we are pushing as a narrative in Enugu. Go and negotiate and bring your PPA, and we'll approve of it so that you can commence, you can execute, and it will be implemented. We are expecting that everybody that's playing our space pays their bills, including the state government. So government is willing to be an off-taker that's going to pay, and it has committed since this administration came into place. I mean, operators of EEDC before now and currently Name Power Electricity Distribution Limited can attest to the fact that they are not being owed for any of their current monthly bills by Enugu state government. So if government is committed to paying his bills and the people are also committed to paying his bill, by all means, why can't I come in and do business in this state? You know, so I mean, I think to summarize it all, some of the structures that has been put in place within the commission is one that guarantees recovery of that investment. The state itself has taken the initiative to ensure that the structures it has also put in place is one that supports private sector driven businesses. Please let me say something about security. I like to think that Enugu is one of the safest states you get in Nigeria today. So investments or investors are safe in Enugu State. I like to also think that the infrastructure being put in place by the state, this particular administration, is one that promotes private sector driven investments. Everything that is happening in Enugu is actually being implemented by the private sector, with the state creating that enabling environment for them to come in and do their businesses the way business is supposed to be done, not relying on the states or the federal government to provide some level of guarantee. No, instead, this administration is eager and keen, in fact, positively driven to be sure that what private sector operators would like to see, and I'm not talking about just the power sector alone, but I'm talking about the different sectors of the economy in Enugu State, is what they see, that they have adequate security in place, that they have access to wherever their project is supposed to be established, and that the enabling, how do I put it now, their taxes are, they have the right kind of taxes that they're paying, the right kind of taxes and not overly burdened by debt, and that the incentive to do the business in the state is there. Let me stop there for now, Naomi, because I'm sure that others may probably even want to pitch in on this conversation.
Yes, thank you. So I'd like Frank to pitch in, and especially from the angle of the national market. States must avoid the pitfalls of the national electricity market. So taking into account what Chijioke has said, what do you think states need to do to actually achieve this goal?
Noelle, Chijioke outlined a number of those things. Understanding the failures of the national market, lack of investment, lack of transparency, and government meddling in what is private individuals' businesses by paying for consumption. Also, states must avoid that. States also need to understand the realities within their states. What do I mean by this? All the states are not the same. There are some states where you have ample opportunities to harness sun rays, solar energy. There are other states where you have lots of bodies of water, large and small, that run. There are others where you have what has been accepted to be transition fuel, which is gas that can power electricity generation. There are still others where you have opportunities, say, for biomass conversion into power. So states must be able to look at opportunities to attract investments into harnessing those sources at source. That is one. States also need to understand the demography of the consumption within their states, right? And then in the siting of industrial opportunities or commercial opportunities, put them in such a way that they can complement other non-commercial uses to help mitigate the cost of delivering energy to those locations. There's also something else that states should be able to do: understand their people and what makes them tick in a manner of speaking. The whole issue of reducing commercial losses, especially when they have to do with collection of revenue from consumption. There are various ways that various means you can apply to do that. And therefore, the models for the distribution subsector have got to be domesticated. And in my view, looking at what even town unions and market groups can do as entities in ensuring that the quantity of power that is delivered to a particular locale is accounted for commercially, those must all be used. And that is that's a way of addressing the business model for distribution. One of the downfalls of the national electricity market was this notion that distribution companies were franchises. No, they're not. They're licensed holders. It should be possible to introduce competition in that space, and states must ensure, in my view, that the way they structure their market, that there is competition in the distribution space. That is one of the channels for guaranteeing that the cost of energy delivered to people can compete for lower costs for the same quality of service. So these are various things that must be done. States must also avoid the pitfall of thinking that they can be everything to themselves. In the state electricity market, there is also the opportunity to exploit what is available in the national wholesale market, both as a means of backup for whatever internal state arrangements that there are, but also as a means of access to perhaps cheaper energy that could come from the grid. All of these are a long way of saying that states must work to understand their environment and not to import solutions from other states to their states. And therefore, having a vision-led policy that guides the creation of laws within the state for the setup of the state electricity market is key, right? And then attracting the right sort of investments into the state. One important thing, Chijioke alluded to it, and for me, it is a death knell for any state any state that makes the mistake, is to think that subsidy is a way forward. There is no future for subsidy. If a government has the need, then they can support and subsidize access, not consumption. And there are various vehicles for subsidizing access, including tapping into avenues such as what the Rural Electrification Agency is doing. All those are things that need to be looked at.
Thank you so much, Frank. That was very, very informative and very insightful. We're almost out of time, so I'm just going to ask one last question to Nkem, and then we'll take questions from the audience. We have quite a few to get through. So, Nkem, my last question is, how do you see electricity markets, especially state electricity markets, evolving in the short term over the next 2 years, and also in the medium term over the next 5 years? And then also just, you can tack this on, what do you think that people or stakeholders aren't talking about enough when it comes to state electricity market investor attractiveness? Nkem, you're muted.
Okay. Let me start with what people are not talking about enough, and then I'll progress to the evolution of the state electricity market. So in my opinion, I think what people in the sector are not talking about enough is carbon pricing. I would explain. Carbon pricing is something that can change the status quo. It's something that would help states not just to build revenue, but also to incorporate renewable energy into their energy mix. And what is carbon pricing? Carbon pricing, in a layman's language, is putting a price tag to carbon emissions. I don't know if that's clear. It means putting a price tag to carbon emissions, and that serves as an environmental cost for emitting a greenhouse gas emission. And there are different ways or mechanisms that you can enforce this in your state. It can be through carbon tax, where you tax individuals or companies that emit this carbon, depending on the quantity. And then there's also a mechanism that is called cap and trade, or emission trading system, where the government, probably through the State Electricity Regulatory Commission or the Ministry of Environment, can issue pollution licenses. They sell pollution licenses to these institutions. And these institutions, if you increase your carbon, you pay. If you decrease your carbon, you'll be paid. So it's a win-win for both parties. And sometimes I'm surprised why it's not being explored. But the good is that I think it was earlier in the year, the National Council on Private, they were developing a framework for carbon pricing, for taxing carbon on the national level. And sometimes I wonder why most state governments are not exploring that opportunity. When we did the Castina policy, as part of the Castina state policy, we developed a framework for implementing carbon pricing mechanisms in the policy. So I think thank God Chijioke is here, I think it's something the state can work together with their Ministry of Environment to explore. It's a win-win thing. They will generate revenue, as well as encourage people that are being taxed can decide, why are we being taxed for fossil fuel? Why have we been paying? Why are we paying for using fossil fuel? And they can switch to cleaner fuel. So it's a win-win both for the state and for the people or the companies or the entities emitting this carbon. So that's on one side. Your second question is on the evolution of the state electricity market and where I see them medium and long term. I'll take this question, I'll try to be fast, but I'll take it maybe from a legal perspective. That would be, what are the provisions of the electricity law on evolution of the market? And then from the market and probably technical perspective. So exactly, or particularly Section 230 of the Electricity Act provides the processes that any state would have to go through when they want to develop their state electricity market. The first would be to pass the state electricity bill into law. Then the states would set up the state electricity market. And once that is done, the state will have to notify NEC, send them a letter of notification, informing them that these two things has happened, and also send a notification letter to the National Council on Privatization through the BPE. And once these institutions get this notification letter, they have within 45 days to respond to the state, telling them or breaking down the processes the state will have to go through for them to transit totally from the national market to the state electricity market. That's on the legal side. On the market side, the state will have to understand. It was Frank that mentioned earlier that you need to know your state. The state will have to understand the market needs. How many megawatt power would the state need? For who? From where? And what would be the source of this power? The state will go ahead to gather data on what they would use to develop this or build this information. And these data gathering and all will culminate into developing an integrated resource plan. And the resource plan is like a planning tool that will tell you this is the capacity we need, this is the assessment in the state, these are the people that need it, this is where we anticipate the power would come from. And also short term, I expect from the market angle that the state would have a market design. From the technical angle, on a short term, the state will have to do infrastructure assessment. The state needs to know what infrastructures do we have? Is it generation? What generation infrastructure do we have? Distribution, transmission infrastructure within the borders of the state. You need to know your asset boundaries as against other subnationals. So these are my expectations short term. When it comes to medium term, you need to enforce the market design you developed earlier. And that includes operationalizing your institutions. Like the market design might include, okay, the state will have to set the State Electricity Regulatory Commission. Depending on the market design, the state can set up the State Electrification Agency. So on that medium term, we expect states to start setting up these institutions, and also for those institutions to start dishing out, like the SEC, the State Electricity Regulatory Commission. Medium term, they will start dishing out the regulations that would govern the market. And on the medium term, for the technical side, I expect that the states will start developing the ISOs that will be in charge of the markets, that will be in charge of the infrastructure. The ISO is the independent system operator, and the market operators that will be in charge of the commercial framework and balancing and support of the market from a commercial angle. So those are our expectations on the short term and medium term. And on the long term, we expect an evolution in such a way that there would be regional or interstate trade transactions. That's on a long term now. We expect on a long term a more mature market that might move from probably maybe a subsidy market to a performance market or a performance-based market, and then to a bilateral market. So we expect long-term that the market will mature and move from subsidy-enabled market to performance, like I mentioned, and then to a bilateral market. Thank you, Noelle. That's the brief. I had to rush through the various stages of the evolution, but trust me, it's much more in-depth and much more detailed than that. But because we are running against time, I had to try and summarize as much as I can. And I also want to state that it is not cast on stone. These processes I mentioned, it's not cast on stone. A state, for instance, Anambra State has an integrated resource plan. They have a policy, but they are to pass their law. But Enugu State has passed their law, have set up the State Electricity Regulatory Market, but they are still working on their integrated resource plan. So these processes are not cast on stone. It depends on the resources available to the state and also how the state wants to go about it. But the one that is cast on stone is the legal perspective, the one provided by the Electricity Act, which states the step-by-step basis. But all the other ones, from the market perspective or from the technical perspective, it depends on the capacity of the state, the resources available to them, and how they want to run their state electricity market. Over from me, Noelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkem. So we are now over time, but we have about 11 questions from the audience. So I'm just going to speed through these. Sorry to everyone, but we might take an additional 5 minutes of your time, or we already have taken an additional 5 minutes. But Chijioke, one of the first questions is for you. So there are two questions. I'm just going to combine them. Sunil is asking about Enugu's gas supply because he's looking for gas-based IPP projects. And then another person who's anonymous is asking whether coal will be considered as part of Enugu State's energy mix.
And yes, Enugu has gas. Let me go straight to the answer so that as not to take too much time. This should have been a 2-hour program, actually, because there's a lot to just talk about. But yes, Enugu State has gas. Where there is coal, there is methane, and I mean pure methane. We have not started exploiting it yet. Instead, we are actually hoping to undertake a study that gives us insight into the natural resources that exist within Enugu State and their volume and their quality, so that we can make it available to developers that are willing to come into our state to play. That's on one side of it. And the second side is coal. If we're amenable to using coal for power generation, definitely. So long as you put the environmental management systems in place and you're using clean technology, to generate the power, by all means, please come on board. Let me put it this way. I mean, with what is happening right now, coal-fired power plants are coming back into the picture. In our own case, we're not talking about doing a large power plant using any of the natural resources we have in our space. No, we're talking about 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts, 15, 20, 50, 100, located in different parts of the state that are generating and supplying directly to their customers, reducing the technical losses associated with it, taking advantage of the various energy resources we have in the state, be it coal, hydro, like every other person has said, solar, as the case may be, and gas. I mean, for now, the IPP that is operating within our space is trucking in the gas using virtual pipelines, but it's generating. And with the recent grid collapse, today's grid collapse, I mean, his off-takers or his customers are not aware that there is a grid collapse. And the mini grid that has also been set up within the state customers that are benefiting from that mini grid are not aware that there is also a grid collapse. Instead, they are enjoying power. Let us see what we're doing as taking advantage of what we have to develop ourselves. And it cuts across every state that wants to take the same initiative. And most importantly, that we are complementing what is happening at the federal level. I saw a question whether we're adopting the MITO as it is, or also going to develop our own MITO model. We have already developed our own MITO methodology and model. It's on our website. Please, Noelle, if it's possible to publish our website so that people can access the regulations and models that we have put in place to assess their project or determine what their costs at the day might be. Let them take advantage of it. All the information is on our website. If there are more questions, I'm very much amenable to taking them.
Okay, thank you, Chijioke. I think we can just type your website in the chat so people can go on there to find the MITO. Another question that we have is from Mohammed Musa. Frank, I'll direct this to you. He's asking, with the massive investments needed, especially to upskill power infrastructure, investors will want to make sure that they are able to recoup their investments. How will this have an impact on the price of power to the final consumer?
Yeah, so that's one of the balances that must be made. In anything I'm doing with any state government, my advice is that the state doesn't get involved in the commercials. So any generation company will need to establish a power purchase agreement with an off-taker, and that's got to be on the basis of what the consumers are able to pay. Now, the good news is many of the people that are currently not being served by the grid are consuming energy, and they are producing this energy at exorbitant costs based either on petrol or on diesel. Therefore, the costs that you have to displace by bringing in generation is already high. You only need to go a little below that to make your product attractive. And this is backed up by a lot of surveys that have been carried out about the willingness to pay of consumers. People are willing to pay, provided you give them the service that they're paying for. So companies, therefore, have got to look at their source of capital. It's got to be patient capital. You don't expect to invest in power infrastructure and recover your money in 2 years. It doesn't work. Yeah, it's got to be over time. And for that, you need assurances that your investments will be secure. And that's where entities like InfraCredit that Chijioke mentioned earlier come in. And in the end, the state is also able to come in to offer some, kind of social guarantees that make it possible for investors to play. Again, this speaks to the nature of the investor that we're looking at. These are going to be people that want to have their skin in the game. It is not some capital coming from wherever that is simply looking at the balance sheet. Now, there's got to be patience and commitment to be in there for the long run. Right. That is how I see the capital for this coming in, and people realizing that the costs that they aim to displace by generation are already high costs that consumers pay on their own self-generation.
Thank you, Frank. Sorry, I'm so sorry, but we won't be able to get to all the questions. So I'm just going to skip through a few of them, and you can send an email to me, and I will direct your questions to the panelists and respond to you at a subsequent time. I'm going to take a question from Zain Khan, and he's saying that how can state governments design their electricity market frameworks to balance predictability with flexibility? But specifically, what approaches can states adopt so that private investors can clearly understand the long-term regulatory roadmap while still allowing for flexible use of approaches and policies to adapt to evolving local conditions of their markets? Nkem, I'm directing this to you.
If we started from the beginning, Frank sort of answered this question. Each state is peculiar. When it comes to state electricity markets, you can't do copy and paste, because what works for Anambra would not work for Castina State. So you have to understand each state, which Frank earlier explained, and model the design to the peculiarities and uniqueness of each state. I'll give you an example. In Anambra State, when we were developing the policy, we had to consider grassroots people, or the grassroots framework of Anambra, because when you look at Anambra State, they have this very developed town union cooperative thing going on. So we leveraged on that existing structure to develop like a cooperative electricity or community-based electricity retail market. So there's no single approach to solving or developing any state electricity market. Each market is unique in its own field. So you have to, like I said earlier, look at the markets, look at the state, understand how the state works, understand their uniqueness, then you tailor it. You tailor whatever approach you have developed to fit those uniqueness in each state.
Thank you, Nkem. I'm going to take just 2 more questions, and then I'll drop my email in the chat. But I'm going to combine 3 of Sunday Ezema's questions, and I'll direct them to Chijioke. So he's asking about GIS, use of data, SCADA systems, and also microgrid systems, and whether the state intends to use these technologies.
I'll say yes, to a very large extent. Just like Nkem has said, I mean, every state is peculiar. And one of the few things that we are doing right now is we're actually carrying out about 3 studies. One is to determine the actual load demand for the state. We are being supported in undertaking that project by one of the donor agencies, as the case may be. I must say that we're also about to receive a lot of support from the NIAF, UK NIAF team, to undertake further studies that gives us actual data, on how our market can evolve or grow to what we want it to be. A study that is currently ongoing in our state is our community enumeration and categorization study. and our enumerators are in the field, pulling in that data as to the structures that exist within our electricity space, to determine how we can categorize our communities as either underserved or unserved. And yes, we're leveraging on some of the GIS, how do I put it now? GIS information that has been put together by quite a number of the donor agencies as well, or development institutions, telling us about the structures that exist within our electrification space. I mean, we want to even undertake a validation study between us and Main Power Electricity Distribution Limited as to the coverage of their infrastructure, the strength of their infrastructure, where they need additional support and where they can operate efficiently and effectively, so as to open up those spaces that they cannot meet the requirements to provide 24/7 power to other developers, so that other developers can come and strengthen, extend, meter, and run those locations as retailing companies. So, I mean, total, yes, we are actually leveraging on some of the newer technologies that exist today to pull in that data so that we can actually put ourselves in a position to make informed regulatory decisions that would be made available to potential developers who can either verify or validate the information that we're putting out there so that we're all on the same page, especially when they are developing their projects for implementation in our state.
Thank you, Chijioke. Now for the last question, I'll direct this to Frank. This is from Alexander Akulu. He's asking, in what areas can development partners support the development of state electricity markets, and how UK NIAF is supporting other states?
Thanks, Noel. Development partners, many are actually very engaged with different aspects. Earlier, I spoke about the toolkit that was developed to support states in their decision-making process towards establishing state electricity markets. That's one of the ways UK NIAF worked on that. The Power Africa NPSP worked on that also. At the moment, UK NIAF is busy with Enugu State, Akwa Ibom State, Oyo State, and probably one other state in Ekiti State in developing wherever they are, moving forward on the state electricity market. The thinking behind this, as I spoke to earlier, is to just have demonstrative implementations of how to do this thing right, so that other states may copy and other donor agencies can also come in and pick up from those templates, so to say, to apply to other states. So these are some of the ways that we're working. Very important for me is that we get 1, 2, 3 successful examples. Then, we would have set the thing in motion. Over.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you to all the participants and to our
please, Noelle, just to cut you short a bit, just give me 30 seconds. Someone asked a question on carbon pricing that I think is very important. Just 30 seconds. He said, don't you think carbon pricing tax as envisaged by Nkem in a country such as Nigeria can worsen energy poverty in the country? I just want to refer the person to a report by Federal Ministry of Environment on carbon pricing implementation in Nigeria. Once he goes to that report and reads the implementation part of it, he would have his answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkem. To all the other questions in the Q&A box, we will email you the answers. And then for anyone else who has questions, please just send them via email and I'll forward them to the participants and we'll ensure that you get an answer. But also please subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on LinkedIn for updates on other webinars and events that we might be holding. But thank you to our panelists for being so gracious and for answering so many questions. I think we'll do this again and have even more time to get through the questions. Thank you and have a nice day.